Thank you for coming here and to discover this wonderful place. So today, we have decided, along with Benoît, to organize a very special event. And it's a roundtable discussion with our friends who come from various countries, who come from Côte-du-Rhône, who come from Switzerland, as well as New Zealand, the Bordeaux region, as well as the Champagne region. And our friends are here today in order to bear witness to the fact that they've all been inspired by Burgundy, the Burgundy region. They've been fascinated, enthralled by Burgundy. Some of them conducted their studies here. And so today we're going to have a discussion with them, or rather, you're going to have a discussion with them, so you can ask them why they have such a close attachment to the Burgundy region. Thank you. Well, no, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of your questions because the time is very limited. Perhaps a few questions. But we wanted to really focus on the notion of terroir during this roundtable. Here at the Cité, we're all very attached to the notion of terroir, and that Burgundy is really the world model for terroir-based winemaking. And so here we have people around the table, or rather up here on the podium, who are also very much interested in the notion of terroir-based winemaking. And of course, we're going to have Robin Kick, who's going to be moderating today's discussion. Robin, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming here. It's truly an honor to be with you today. For me, Burgundy is a region that has always inspired me. The first time that I came here was in 1990, and it was by sheer coincidence. A friend of mine had organized a little evening. We were going to spend one evening here before going on to Germany. And I was a young au pair in Lille. I wasn't even of drinking age, to be quite honest, by American standards. I'm American. But I actually fell in love with the wine, with the cuisine, with the architecture of the region. And so every time I think about wine, my first thoughts are about Burgundy. And so I've been working with Burgundy wines for some 23 years now. And that's why I was profoundly touched when I was invited to come here today. So I hope that Mr. Selosse is going to come, or perhaps he's slightly delayed. Mr. Anselme Selosse. Well, we'll start off with Jaume, Gramona. Here he is. We've done some musical chairs here. So he's a fifth generation winemaker in the Penédes region in Spain. He creates cava, so sparkling wine. And it's all about the complexity, and also his wines are perfect for aging, and they are quite amazing. He also focuses on organic and biodynamic winemaking with Claude Bourguignon, and he also helped create an appellation system for cava in order to have a more nuanced description of cava. And here we have Nigel Greening. He's the owner of Fulton Road in New Zealand. He's a Pinot Noir pioneer in central Otago. And he also has been doing terroir-based winemaking, single varietal winemaking, which wasn't common at all in New Zealand back in the day, whereas today it's become quite standard worldwide and in New Zealand. He also has adopted biodynamic practices. Nigel doesn't really believe in intervention. He believes that the grape needs to express itself. So welcome, Nigel. Then we have Alain Mouet. gentleman in the center here. He is an enologist, and he manages a chateau in Bordeaux. It's a Chateau Mazère in Saint-Emilion, and another one in Pomerol on the right bank of Bordeaux. He is also has experiences in other areas, and he truly believes in biodynamic winemaking for several years. He's also vice president of Biodivin, the biodynamic winemaking trade union. Next, we have Aldo Vaira, who's from the master of Barolos. He comes from the highest village in Barolo. I think the vineyards are located at 500 meters in altitude, and they have several Barolos on offer. He truly believes in the climas because there are climas in Barolo as well. And I believe he's one of the first people in the Barolo region to have adopted biodynamic agriculture, and he continues to respect that philosophy. And he works with his three children, who I know very well, Giuseppe, Francesca, and Isodoro. And of course, they will take up the domain after him. Then we have Monsieur Marcel Guigal from the Maison Etienne Guigal. He heads up the domain with his son Philippe. They are third-generation winemakers, and they produce wines in the entire Rhone Valley. And they have several domains, but they're very known for their Côte-Rôtie wines, which are called the La La La, La Landonne, La Turque, and La Mouline, which I absolutely love. I must say that's one of my favorite. I love the elegance of La Mouline. So welcome, sir. And then we have Marie-Thérèse Chapa from Valais. I also live in Switzerland. She's quite renowned in Switzerland. She comes from an area that's the very beginning of the Rhone Valley. And so the vineyards are similar to what you might find in Côte-Rôtie, so heroic winemaking, very steep hills and terraces. She's known for the Grains Nobles, Petit Arvin Grains Nobles, which are some of the best wines. She makes some of the best wines in that category. She also focuses on biodynamics, and she believes in the least intervention type of winemaking. Next, we have JeanMichel Dice from the Domaine Marcel Dice in Alsace. And this is a person who is very much attached to terroir. And I saw a few things on your website that I found quite interesting. You says that a terroir is always stronger than the vineyards that are planted there. And you say that the vines speak to each other, and I think that's extraordinary that they communicate with each other. So we will talk about terroir and his experiences. And last but not least, welcome to Mr. Anselme Selosse, who comes from the Jacques Selosse domain. So he's been working with his son Guillaume for some time now, and he's also based in Avis. He's an iconic producer. He started off with biodynamics, and then around 2002 you switched, is that correct? In order to adopt his own type of winemaking that is very respectful of the land, that adapts to nature and does not force nature. And I believe that you have a lot of old vines that you use in your champagne making. Amazing. So without further ado, we're going to get started. And I'd like to suggest that we start with winemakers who come from regions in which the notion of climat or terroir has been recently introduced and not quite as common. So Anselme, we're going to talk about the Champagne region with you. Champagne is a very region that's well known for mixing of different plots, blending different plots. So how have you been inspired by the climas of Bourgogne, of Burgundy? This is a story that began 50 years ago in the 1970s. I came to winemaking in Beaune, and here I met very devoted people who had a lot of humility, and they worked very closely with their wines and with their vineyards, even if the winemaking at the time was not at the same level as it is today. And so I understood, and also I tasted, I saw, and I observed that a wine that comes from a place is amazing, and it's very notable compared to other wines. Not in terms of the winemaking itself, but in terms of respecting the vines and the grapes' expression. And that really struck me, because people in Champagne, they talk about blending, they talk about the chef de cave who blends various varietals in order to reassure consumers and to tell them, oh, don't worry, in 2 years, 5 years, you'll always have exactly the same flavor that's our Domaine's brand. So that is perhaps reassuring, but I believe that other visions exist. I'd like to tell you about a little story that really impacted me. It was in 1971. I was at La Viti, and there was an ecology course that was provided. And so we were in the Montagne de Bourgogne, and we had to trace a long line, and we had to recognize all of the different varietals, the plants, the fauna as well, the flora and the fauna. And so it was a 1 meter long line, and we were able to see that there was the same balance. And then all of a sudden there was a disruption. And so the person would ask us to dig so that we'd look at the biotop, to look at the physical things, the granulometry, the depth, the shadow, the slope. And of course, there was a direct correlation between the fauna and flora in that location and the physical conditions that were encountered. That was a really breakthrough moment for me. It was something that really modified my perception. And over time, I also realized that another important aspect of a terroir is the permanency in everything that changes. And by that I mean, regardless of weather variation, you still have the same characteristics that come through. And so for me, that is really essential. Why do I say this? Well, often the word terroir is overused, but we need to know about the history, what comes before, why was the name given to this particular plot based on its characteristics. And also in the wine and other products, because it's not just wine that comes from terroir. There's also the impact of the place from which this all comes out. I would like to focus on this word, the place of birth of these elements. Well, when people come see me, if I have time, I'll say l'autre même, other and the same, autre même, other but the same. It's like the phenotype. So the genotype is is the birthplace, and the phenotype would be the weather variations. And so there is that impact. And so what we need to do is we need to be able to be able to flesh out the word terroir. It's not just a poetic expression. We really need to ensure that people who come see us, that they truly understand that terroir means something. It's not just a catchphrase. Thank you so much, Anselme. You have inspired many smaller winemakers in Champagne who are doing terroir-based wine. Yes, and I'm not casting aside blending. So, you have the birthplace of the wine. So blending in a given year can be interesting because here you really focus on the birthplace, so to say, of the wine. And so you can negate variations stemming from variations in weather. or you can blend the origins if you just want to focus on the character that's provided by the weather. Thank you. So let's move on to Spain. Jaume also has a very specific style, and I know you have a lot to say about this, because Cava is really a region. Well, I shouldn't say it's a region. It's a domaine, a DO that consists of 8 regions. So could you tell us about your experiences with the climat and the climat expressions? Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming today. I'm happy here to be able to represent our region. So I was trained here in Bourgogne, in Burgundy. I chose this rather than Montpellier and rather than Bordeaux. And I selected this because there's a wide variety of wines that are available here. The Côte Chalonnaise or Chablis. Today we're in Beaune, and then there's also Macon, and also sparkling wine, because I come from the country of sparkling wines, of bubbles. And so certainly the spirit of Burgundy is something that I always kept throughout my career. So some 3 years ago, we decided to create an appellation, Cava DO, which is no longer a method. It's not just a winemaking process, it's really an appellation. And my father contributed to the creation of this DO, and I was also myself the president of the Cava Institute, and so it really was part of my DNA. But ultimately, I realized it's such a vast appellation. It covers all of Spain. DO Cava, it really doesn't have an impact. And that's why, with 2 other winemakers, and today there are 12 of us, we left the Cava DO, we left that appellation and created an association that is trying to get an IGP, a protected geographical indicator. So we want to have something just in the Penédes. And so we mapped out the soils, the plot, and so it's all about having an identity. And even within our own domain, my son, 6th generation, he continues to go even further, so as to ensure that for each of our products, each of our climat, we can have that focus. So it's about biodynamics. So once I discovered that, I've been teaching for 34 years at the university, and all we talk about is enology, and not much about agriculture. But I think that it's important to move in that direction. And when I came to Dijon, there was winemaking, but it's only 30 years later that I realized that we also need to look inside the ground. What is the soil? What does the soil consist of in order to adapt to the climas? And so adapting, that entails going a bit further and having integrated winemaking, organic winemaking, and then moving on to biodynamic winemaking. And in our region, it's easier than in Burgundy or in Champagne. It's easier to move towards biodynamic and organic. Earlier, I was chatting with Anselme. Biodynamics comes more from your spirit than from your head. And everybody has to do it in their way. You need to look at what you have in your area. And in our region, we want to continue making sparkling wine for 5 more generations. Effervescent wine is very, very affected by climate change, and that's why we need to take great care of our region. I have a lot to say, but I'll stop here. What you're saying is absolutely fascinating, and perhaps we will have a DO someday, but you're saying that it's important also to recognize something that's more specific. Yes, there's 12 companies that are doing corpinate, so heart, and vine and Penédes, so that we were born in the heart of Penédes, so Corpinat. And so we're trying to have an expression like in Champagne. It's also 100% organic, 100% made at the chateau, on the domain, 18 months of aging minimum. And like the Burgundy region, we truly believe in our own product, our own terroir, our own climate. And so we wish to share this world of effervescent wines that's very unique. We're the only wine, Cava is the only wine that's really a rising star, shooting star. Wonderful. Now we're going to pass the floor to Nigel. So New Zealand, having single varietal growing is something that is been going on for 25 years in.
Avec le micro, voilà.
If you like, I'm used to shouting. Kia ora tēnā koutou katoa. I bring you greetings from the vigneron of Aotearoa. I think it's because I originally come from England and I was lucky through much of my life there to drink some good Burgundy. I always understood the concept of terroir. It was just a natural thing to me. And it was quite a surprise when I went to New Zealand and found that people then didn't think that way. Winemaking generally, a domain would come with two tiers of wine. They would have the normal wine and then their premium wine. But the premium wine was a product of the winemaker. The winemaker chose which pieces would be that and how they made it. So this was a human construction. Now that has changed completely. I can think of almost no premium wine in New Zealand where the difference is a human one. For almost everybody now, the difference is their premium wines, their top wines, are wines of place. Ironically, just now I was thinking of this and I thought, yeah, there is one exception, which would be the most famous New Zealand wine, Cloudy Bay, but this is owned by LVMH, so okay. A French problem. In New Zealand, we have our own traditional interpretation of terroir. The Maori have always had. It's called Tauranga Waiwai. And it takes the approach that it's when the human spirit comes together with the land that the potential is realized. Until that point, the land is just the land and the person is the person. But when the farmer and the land come
avec
together...
le micro. Sorry, with the microphone.
I'm sorry, it's only when the land and the farmer come together that the two become realized. But it requires, of course, the right attitude on the part of the farmer. Otherwise, this symbiosis never happens. And I think this has brought two big changes. First, a huge increase in organic and biodynamic farming. In my region, it's now about 20% biodynamic. But also a change in the behavior of a winemaker. You must be modest and you must allow the wine to make the decisions and not the person. I love, in French, it is magical that you use the term élevage, because that is our job. The wines are our children, and it is our job to be a parent and to give them guidance, but we mustn't tell them what they want to become. They have to make that decision themselves.
So now we are going to turn towards Bordeaux. As we know, the Bordeaux region is very well known for blending, assemblage in French, the blending. And so now we're going, Anselme is going to tell us, the next person is going to tell us how this has affected it. So I've bought wine in Bordeaux, and so people in Bordeaux think that Burgundy just has white wine, and they think these are beautiful wines. And the white wines are less known. But Alan, I believe that you have been inspired by red wines. Alain Mouet. Yes. So how have I been influenced by the wines of Burgundy? I'm going to talk about 3 aspects. First of all, there's a connection to climate. So I started taking care of the Château Fonroc in Saint-Emilion in 2002, and I soon realized that there wasn't just one terroir, but there were actually 7. So you could perhaps refer to it as a climat. And this is a notion that remained in my mind. And so I would treat them all separately. And so when people came, I would get a pipette, and we'd go straight to the barrel, which was perhaps more of a Burgundy tradition, and I'd have them taste the wine so they can see how the soil's architecture gives an architecture to the wine as well as an aromatic profile. And in fact, I went a little bit further than that. At some point in time, I thought to myself, why not have this label at the Château Fonroc? I realized that I was going to change my, I was going to lose my classement, so I had to backtrack. But this notion stayed with me. A good assemblage is one in which the 7 items are there. It's when you find the right balance so nothing sticks out, but where everything is there. And so this is something I pay close attention to with blending, and that's where the climat comes in. In addition, Burgundy also saved me on another level, because when I started taking care of this domaine in Bordeaux, we were looking for something that was very muscular wine, but that was something that appealed to me. And here, Pinot Noir is always very close to limestone, or limestone's very far from the Pinot Noir. So I was looking for models in my own area, for models that might inspire me. And so the Burgundy region really interested me. So to have more chiseled tannins, to have straighter wines, and that's what I've always been trying to find. And for a while, I wasn't very fashionable in Bordeaux, but I kept along my track and what I wanted to do. And it's by tasting Burgundy wines that I found models, and that I was able to reassure myself about having, a red grape varietal in a limestone terroir. What can you do with it? And so that really reassured me in my researches. Third aspect, I use biodynamic growing techniques for my varietals, and I use the 4 elements to characterize what I do. And so in the Burgundy, I always felt that earth, which is through the soil, and fire with aromatic, it was perhaps too present compared to water and air. Water, as you know, it's the fluidity, not aqueous, but it's a fluidity whereby the wine is refreshing and all of the elements are perfectly balanced in a harmonious manner. And I believe this is something that's more common in Burgundy wines rather than Bordeaux wines of the time. Things are now changing, fortunately. And then air, another element, one of the 4 elements. And so it's when you're giving a certain verticality to wine, so it's not just horizontal. And so the space in the middle is air. I know it's a bit difficult to explain, but imagine an egg white when you beat it and it becomes... when you beat it and it becomes an egg white, it's the same thing. When you give verticality to a wine, you're creating volume without increasing the tannins. So you're not enhancing the tannins. You're trying to have an opening in the mouthfeel. And so I believe that Burgundy wines really express that far better than most Bordeaux wines at the time. I'm referring to at the time because now things are changing in Bordeaux. And so yes, Burgundy saved me. I like that image of the egg white that's beat to create volume. So there's a certain lightness, but also full. I like the aspects of the 4 elements. I think earth, wind, fire, air, I like that a lot. So now we're going to keep moving on to places in which the notion of climat is more historical. And we're going to chat with Aldo Vaira now, who is a Barolo producer. So Piedmont, particularly Langhe, well, these are close cousins of Burgundy. There's a lot of discussion between them. It's a beautiful region. And you also have varietals that I call transparent, because they really reveal the specific terroir of each vine plot. So what is your connection with Burgundy? Well, there are many. There are many ties that link the Piedmont region to Burgundy and Langhe to Burgundy. So I discovered Burgundy through a label that a wine that my father had in his cave. The first non-Italian wines that my father had in his cave were from Burgundy, and so that made me really curious. After that, I'm not the son of a winemaker, but it's something that I wanted to do, and I had a lot of problems with my parents because they could not accept that their son would become a winemaker. And you know what? That's a problem, because you have to think about what Langhe, that region, was in the 50s, not the way it was today. In Langhe, it was post-war. There was a lot of poverty. We weren't even sure that we were going to be able to sell these grapes. My parents, but especially my grandparents, they had experienced all the difficulties that come with having vineyards: cold, the hail, lack of maturity. For Nobilio, the late harvest wines, they would get phenolic. They had to have phenolic maturity and become quality. So at the time, we had other varietals such as Dolce, Barbera, which have a more anticipated aging. So they were protected from various aspects. And so my parents didn't want me to become a winemaker, and I wanted to be a grower, a farmer, and so I have an agronomical background. And so I followed ecology courses. At the time, we didn't talk about biodynamics, we didn't talk about organic, we talked about ecology. And I was fortunate enough to have a professor who had known Maria Thun. And so beyond the training that I received, the university training, we were able to be very close to all of this. And that's when I discovered global varietals. And then I discovered what Nebbiolo was. I better understood Nebbiolo, but I also learned about other varietals, such as Pinot Noir. And so also the difficulty of winemaking, how it needs to be delicate, how it needs to respect the fragrance of the wine. And this is something that's remained with me. And that's why I decided I wanted to come to Burgundy. And so when I arrived here, I saw a mosaic of plots, of vineyards. And that's how I imagine Piedmont. That's what's going to bring us together. This is stories of men and women who have been resilient, who have withstood the difficulties of weather, the difficulties of the sickness that affects vines. And they have been able to create a heritage, a human heritage, beautiful stories. And they run parallel to each other in both of these regions. But above that, you've had the abbeys, the monks, the dukes, and we have a very story with the Marquise of Barolo, Juliette de Lévrier. She married the Marquis of Barolo, and in 1843, he gave the king 325 small vines. So 325, why that number? Because 365 are the number of years, but 40 are Lent. The Marquise was a very religious woman. They did not have any children, but they did a lot for the human heritage and for the poor people in the city of Torino. You have the Opera Pia Barolo. And she also created an order of soirée, I don't know how you say that, of sisters, a religious order that is very involved. But she also launched the first marketing operation, because after that, the king decided, as did the other nobles, they decided to take care of the Lange vineyards in a very different manner. So you have Cavura with Cité de Graria, or Apolencio, or the Chateau de Verduno. These domains developed thanks to that marketing operation that was launched by the Marquise. So to be here with you today for the inauguration of this marvelous Cité des Climats et des Vins de Burgundy, it really fills me with emotion. We live in an era in which we're opening up for amateurs. And so with the Cité de Bourgogne, we can create common stories and common projects. I come from Piedmont. Piemonte, we tend to be very reserved. We are humble, and our stories are humble as well. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to ask you to come visit us, and to also always be humble and to continue to be amazed. And let us continue to protect our profession from the barbarians who are at the gates today. And who are the barbarians? Well, these are speculators who are coming into our region. These are people who don't love our region. It's just because they have nowhere else to go. We need aficionados. We need wine amateurs. And that is what you're doing with the Cité des Climats et des Vins. And so this fills me with emotion. Thank you so much. It's very touching, Aldo. Thank you. I fully agree with you. So now we're going to go to another region, which is perhaps a spiritual cousin. We're going to go to the Côte Rôtie, another area in which there are a lot of different climas. 75, is that correct? More or less. And so Marcel is going to talk about the hierarchy that exists in Burgundy and how this has perhaps inspired the hierarchy in Côte Rôtie. First of all, I wasn't going to talk about that today, but there's been a lot of talk about biodynamics. But Kigal doesn't talk about that. It's like religion. You need to not talk about it, but you can have convictions. I was fortunate enough to meet a person, a gentleman, who created in France something that is absolutely essential. And he originated organic winemaking. His journal was called Le Paysan Biologiste. We became friends. We had a lot of points in common. And I don't need to be telling this to you because you're the best example of this, but everything comes from the soil. Everything emerges from the soil. And this is a complex process, and we need to understand it. Of course, some things we can't understand. But this person who wrote this journal really enlightened myself and my father. My father started winemaking at the age of 14. Our family is about winemaking. We are all the time in the vineyards. So we have an angle, a vertical angle of 45 degrees in our vineyards. And so it's important to understand. So what this person that I'm talking about, he taught us something. Is that through this perception, you need to be in the vineyards and you need to sense things that are difficult to understand, and you can understand them. And here I tap my hat to my dear friend, Aubert. Monsieur Desgroupes. It was a revelation, I'm sure for you as well, as it was for us. And what we discovered, that all of the microclimates, the microclimat that we call lieu-dit. In Burgundy, you call it a climat, which is a very nice position. When you photograph them, when you're doing the winemaking, well, you always think that the winemaker, the wine grower, just tells all these great stories, and then you taste the wine and you say, oh, it's amazing. But if you photograph during the winemaking, if you take a snapshot of all of our plots, and I'm sure it's the same for you, I've seen it everywhere. it's exactly where you see that miracle of the soil, the miracle of the terroir. And then, of course, you have the cépage, the varietal, and then you have human intervention. And this is a combination that is really unique, and it's visible, and it's essential. This is a revolution. We have a best photograph of France and best photographer of the world, and these are this is a person who came to visit us, and untouched photographs. And I just wanted to mention that because wine is magical. Wine is something that is part of our French heritage. There's a profound, we of course have a profound admiration for Burgundy. We're close physically to Burgundy. And we have a deep admiration for the wines that are chiseled here, that are just truly unique. That being said, Vallée du Rhône, Côte-Rôtie is a vineyard that was going to disappear because of there were some issues, because all of the vineyards were going to be sold off to be built. And so, people at the time, when I joined my father, they said, no, Côte-Rôtie is over, and this is where, buildings are going to be built, and you need to leave. And I refused to do that, and I decided to stay there and fight for Côte-Rôtie. And so I fought, and I was able to obtain the passing of a law that has never been violated. And we had a progression of Condrieu, so that's of 6% every year of new planting. And so now Côte-Rôtie is an area that is inspirational. And we are fortunate enough to have two sections. So we have the Côte Blonde and the Côte Brune, very different terrains, but in the middle of Côte Brune and Côte Blonde, we have vine plots, and this is the magic of Burgundy. Because we know them, we understand them. And of course, through that, we have achieved a level where these are really drivers, the three la-las. And there's a fourth one coming out. Château d'Ampuis. No, not Champeau d'Altuis. No. That's been there for a long time. You have La Reynarde. We're going to add La Reynarde. So you have La Mouline, La Landonne, et La Turque, and we're going to add La Reynarde. So let me talk about a frustration that we do have. We had Premier Cru in Côte-Rôtie, and there was a plan, and when they tried to bring down Côte-Rôtie in order to turn it into an urban development center, because the vineyards were really hard to work. There was an old guy and a crazy guy. That was me. And so people wanted to enter a new chapter, to make a lot of money by selling off the land in Côte-Rôtie so that it could become an urbanized area. But how things have changed, and that is very fortunate, because today we do have frustration. I stayed at the Agnano, and I'm still determined. We have Premier Cru and Grand Cru at Châteauneuf. That no longer exists. Côte-Rôtie, so certain things have been removed from us. And so that people can work better, we want people to understand what can be done in the mini plots, what you do here in Burgundy, the very micro plots. So in 8 days, I'm going to be welcoming the president of the ENAO, and we've had various investigative committees, and I've been next to René Renouve, the president that we talked about a lot, and we have been determined. We did not succeed in our endeavor, but I'm not going to give up. I'm continuing to fight. Many of us are defending this. And this is symptomatic. Everywhere you hear about the great wines of Bordeaux, And of course, I'm familiar with them because I was in charge of the Médoc. I went to Saint-Émilion. I saw how difficult it was to move things in the Bordeaux region, to change things. But you always need to look up. And it's always important to do climat expressions and to have big winemaking plots that drive everything. And it's important to make sure that everybody continues to understand what's beautiful in this country. We're going to move on to Marie-Thérèse now. She's going to talk about how attached she is to terroir winemaking, and you also have other ideas. Hello. So I'm a winemaker in the Valais, in Valais. So to go back to Aldo, what Aldo said, my father was not a winemaker, but he loved wine, he loved gastronomy, and unlike Aldo, it's my father who encouraged me to become a winemaker. I started when I was just 17 years old, and we always drank magnificent red wines from Burgundy, Barolo, Bordeaux. And the white wines, we drank the wines from our hillside, from Clèves. And the notion of appellation, I believe it is important. And what I admire about Burgundy, it's something that I've always thought was quite incredible. I believe that when you have a wine, you need to anticipate the wine. I don't like to have blind tastings because you don't have the anticipation when you don't know what wine you're about to drink. And words such as Chambol, Musigny, Les Amoureuses, Romane sa viva. These are beautiful words, and they're words that speak to us, and they're stories such as Croparentou, like Jackie was telling me yesterday. It was amazing. And other words that call into question, Homme mort in Chablis, or Claudimouche. These are strong words. So Claude Duc. I think that makes one dream. Those appellations are more expressive than the name of the winemaker. Of course, certain winemakers do create that astonishment, but the names are what's so important, and that remains eternal. As winemakers, of course, we are part of the interaction with the terroir, with the climat, with our vintage, but we serve the climat, we serve the terroir. And so we must be in the shadows. And our parcelle, our lieu-dit, our terroir remains eternal. We're not eternal. We will disappear. And I hope that my other domain that I'm trying to put forth before myself, but it's difficult in Valais, I hope the domaine des Clèves shall also remain eternal. At the time in Valais, we had a lot of lieux-dits, a lot of places. Like we had some lieux-dits called Le Brésil, Le Claveau, Cocampé, and we even have one called Soleil. And with Le Valais, it was a pity because they tried to homogenize it. They wanted to have one Dôme du Valais, and so we lost all of these smaller appellations. Canton de Vaud has stayed, you have Saint-Symphorien, Calamat, all the villages have remained, but they just have one varietal. It's much more, it's easier than for us because we have a lot of varietals. But it needs to be genuine. If you think about an appellation that's successful, you need to make sure that it's 100% rather than 6% of a less well-known plot. I think there needs to be a certain truth to these appellations, and this is what you do in Burgundy, because you have a lot of controls to ensure that it's a single varietal. But that's disappeared in Valais. And then they wanted to have a great cru in each commune. But Grand Cru was not attached to the lieu-dit. It was attached to the commune with rules, with specifications, a minimum of 15 years of age, and you had to reduce the yield. These were quality criteria, but they were attached to the municipality, the commune, and we were moving away from the lieu-dit. And so I suggested that we use lieux-dits. We have very beautiful ones. Mur, we have appellations. There are 3 or 4 that are related under Clèves. And then we have also Plamont, 2 appellations of lieux-dits, of places that are used. But we have not been able to set up the village Premier Cru, Grand Cru, because of course everybody wants to be equal. And everybody would like to be part of the Grand Cru. But there cannot be equality. That is not our decision to make. Am I being too long? We just want to, Marie-Thérèse, in the scenography that you're going to see, you're going to see the origins of these names, which have had such a deep impact of Burgundy, and we will tell that story. All right, well, let me wrap up quite quickly then. I don't believe in simplification. I believe it's as if you ate the same thing every day just to make things simpler. If you did that, you would have deficiencies. And so I believe it's a shame to simplify. People need to, on the contrary, to learn more, to move towards increased knowledge. There's a lieu-dit that's called Les d'Art, DHRES. It's a very strong name. So now they've called it DARES. They've taken away the H. It's ugly, it's simple, and it's a shame. Yes, the Grand Cru in the Valais region, it's very complex because in each part of Switzerland it's different. Each canton is different, and there are differences in each canton, so it's difficult. And thanks for trying to explain that, Marie-Thérèse. So now the floor is over to JeanMichel Dice, who's going to talk about his passion for terroir. JeanMichel loves the notion of terroir, and so now we're going to listen to JeanMichel. And he has 4 minutes. We need to respect the time here. Impossible for me to just to limit myself to 4 minutes. We were talking about this earlier. I just can't, and I'll try to be brief, but it's going to be difficult. I was not destined to be a winemaker. There are a lot of different things I could have done. My parents were encouraging me to do something else. And my grandfather, in fact, brought me into the vineyards. He had me work in the vineyards. And quickly I knew that this was a treasure that was intended for poetic belief in the space that each of us has to become freer in our endeavors. And that's why I decided to become a winemaker. It was difficult, of course, because people told me at first, it ain't hard, just you have to fend for yourself in the vineyard, in the cave, you have to fend for yourself, you have to produce the taste of Riesling, but cheaper than your neighbor, and that's it. Don't worry about anything else. And I thought that was so disrespectful, because I believed that it was the opposite of the profound relation that brings a man together with the place and the plant. And so day in, day out, I called into question all the rules, all the obligations. That led to that way of thinking, that disaster scenario. As a man with a bit of sensitivity, paints here, paints there, and then he's told, stop, we'll just give you a stencil, and all you have to do is color in the stencil, and it's a done deal. And I told myself, if that's what it's all about, I might as well shoot myself. And I couldn't live that way. And so what I did is within the varietal, the varietal itself, I tried to bring out the differences. I tried to tease them out. And so I remember once I was able to have 13 different Rieslings, and one day the man came back with bottles, and he told me, listen, I'm bringing back these bottles. Your wine is superb, but we just want Riesling. And this is not Riesling. It can't be Riesling. And so either you tell yourself it's a disaster, you mucked around, or the wine is bad, or you put the wrong label on the bottle. So this man said, I love Riesling, this is not Riesling. And so it was my grandfather's vineyard, 100% Riesling, but the terroir was sending a message that was so strong, so full, a very clay-based terroir, and it couldn't be Riesling. So I took away the word Riesling and I put Bourg. And the same guy came back, and his voice was quivering. He said, "Dear sir, your wine is amazing. It's touched me. It's superb. My wife and I tasted it. We love it. That's all we drink. And you're not selling it expensive enough. I can't give it to my older brother. He wouldn't understand it." And so that encouraged me, and so I intensified everything. I increased the density of plantation, and then the time came when this system of single varietal per terroir reached its limits. we have 13 different varietals like Châteauneuf, and we are a region with zero obligations in terms of proportions, and that's a very important distinction. And so that meant that I had to euthanize 12 varietals to just keep a single varietal and help my terroir express itself. And so then Michel Béthane wrote an editorial in a magazine, and there's a title that said 100% is a Nazi concept. That's what he wrote. 100% is a Nazi concept. And since I have a personal history that is strongly impacted by everything that concerns Mariupol and Shoah and Auschwitz, I decided that I was going to put everything into the plot, and I was going to take responsibility for the results, because this was going to be a naturalist approach. It wasn't going to talk about me or my ego, but the land was going to preach. It was going to incarnate itself. And it's the voice of the lieu, of the place that was going to express itself. And I am but a small person, but this is something that I could pass on to my children. But I needed to be in the background. He told me, don't retire, but just sit in the background. And I followed his advice. And so now I'm passing this on to my son. So today we have 40, I refound the 47 varietals and lieux, and I'm going to add them. And so we're going to have vineyards with 60 or more varietals. And as a child does, I want to make sure that they can all remain together. I don't want to separate them, and I never want to come up with this notion of proportions, because together they are legitimate in creating the music of winemaking. What's the difference between music and noise? With music, you don't hear the different instruments. And so the cymbal, when it's in the orchestra, you hear it. It's beautiful. It's a light. And so the noisiest of the varietals, Gewürztraminer, when it joins the lieu and when it blends into it, it becomes the symbol of the symphonic orchestra. Nothing needs to be added. It's all there. And so that is my project. And of course, it creates a lot of issues, because today the system of appellations, and this has been something that's been ongoing since the year 2000, it's based on a model of simplification, as my friend said. Simplification. You're a village. You can have 5 varietals. You're a premier cru. Give up 3 varietals. You have 2. And if I'm a grand cru, oh my goodness, then I'll have to take away another one. And it's the opposite that we should be doing. And this is my intimate conviction. We will not be able to face climate change unless we use biodiversity, unless we leverage the very first form of biodiversity, and that is having multiple varietals that are balanced out and that have a legitimate place in the lieu, in the terroir, with a winemaker that serves the vineyard. Thank you. That was very, very touching. I was chatting earlier with JeanMichel, and I could continue for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left, so we're going to move on to a few other very important topics. JeanMichel, you talked about the environment, you talked about climate change, so perhaps we could just have a few minutes to talk about how we should protect these magical areas. How do we protect the climas? So first we'll talk with Jaume, because Spain is known for that. You're the most organic vineyard in the world, and the climas help a lot, or the weather helps a lot. And so is this important in order to protect the climas? Yes, I believe we have much remains to be done so that we can adapt ourselves. Adaptation, perhaps that's not the most adapted word, but what I mean is that often winemakers we're selfish. We only think about ourselves. Wine growers, we only think about ourselves. We don't think about the plant enough. And so now we're coming back to different ways of cutting and pruning the vineyard. We're using different types of pruning methods. And there's another practice that has also almost disappeared. It's when you are doing transplants, grafting the wines, like the Americans do. So you give it a greater ability to adapt. And so grafting at the right moment and using plants that have been retained for more than 100 years, and that these plants are well adapted to certain conditions. So we need to adapt. And washing for us, we've had 3 years of drought, and this is work that we've done. We have a project at European level. So we have 35 hectares of wood in addition to our vineyards. So the broyage is something, the crushing, the broyage that helps us to preserve the humidity, the organic matter, and that helps to retain water, retain moisture. And so we need to respect the microbiology of the soil. We talk about biodiversity at the surface, but we also have to respect the biodiversity that's underground in the soil. Sometimes, our sight, we only limit ourselves to sight, but that means we can only smell. But we need to find the balance. It's a triangle that needs to be perfect between the plant world, the animal world. We don't talk enough about animals, but I believe it's very important to talk about the fauna, and then terroir, and it's something, and that's managed by mankind. So why are animals? Why is farm important? It's not necessarily about biodynamics, but farms are important because animals show us a lot of things. They can show humans a lot of things. And I don't have time to really get into it, but this is something that I am ultimately convinced about. If we were to think more about plants, about the plant, and we can bring added value to our grapes, and that will help us do a lot of different things. And perhaps back in the day we planted just about anywhere. But now we need to be more selective. Look at your terroir, make decisions that are based on an analysis of the terroir. And I think this is a philosophy that has already been adopted in Burgundy. Thank you. So now we're going to switch regions because Anselme, you're in the Champagne region. But here I'm going to play devil's advocate. Some people criticize Champagne, the Champagne region. They say that Champagne does not have organic or biodynamic practices. I know that's not the case with you, but do you believe that progress is being made in your region? Yes, in fact, we're moving forward very rapidly in Champagne. Even the biggest Champagne winemakers all have committed to, environmentally respectful practices. Have they adopted a given path over another? That's not the case. And I'd like to praise a certain course. There are different ways to be environmentally respectful. There are different tracks that can be followed, but I believe that it's by having multiple tracks that we'll be able to choose the pathway that is most suitable for what awaits us in the future. What is perhaps a shame is Champagne is really focused on marketing aspects, and sometimes there are abusive usage of social media in order for some to say that they're being spectacular in the revolution that they're conducting. But let us adopt wisdom. Let us turn towards teaching. I believe we need to really change the courses of the next generation. They need to have biology courses. They need to have phytotechnical courses, philosophy courses. We need to make sure that the newcomers have the notions they need in order to withstand dogmatic notions. We need to be very selective. When I left the biodynamic approach, I believe that the advisor that I had at the time was not the most adapted. But thanks to that, I was able to explore other ways with Bill Morton or Nazano, which is another more philosophical course way, and very interesting. And it certainly elevates the person who puts it into practice. And I believe that the Champagne region is on the right track, and so saying that by 2025, certain weed killers won't be used at 100%. Sometimes things are said to reassure consumers. It's not necessarily true. But what's important is to move forward as quickly as possible, but without trying to be spectacular. I just need 30 seconds. I would like to say that when people say they have a biodynamic approach, when we have a 450 hectare that's biodynamic. And it's not just about the work in the vineyard, it's also about sustainability. And in Champagne, that's what you talk about, that if you can't be sustainable in the chai and in the winemaking process, and with all that represents, because of course everybody, the buzzword today is sustainability, but a lot needs to be done so that we can confront climate change. And this has to happen also in the chai itself, in the winery. There's so much that we want to say, but we don't have a lot of time. We just have 2 minutes left. Oh, JeanMichel, of course. Welcome again. I'm going to be brief. I think what's at stake here is to ensure that our kids can become paysans again, farmers, paysans. That is the most beautiful word in the French language. The paysan, he builds a pays, he builds a country. And that's the farmer. He builds the country. He speaks the land's language. He senses things. He doesn't need to learn them on a school bench. The paysan receives these notions and interprets them. And so I'd like to advocate a wine grower and agriculture that is based on desire, on aspirations. We want people to listen to their aspirations and desires because that comes from much further away. It's something that's also a necessity. Why am I waking up to do this today? Nobody's forcing me to do it. Why am I pruning that wine? Why am I going to plow this land? Something pushes me to do it because I am a paysan, a farmer, and that is the most difficult thing to convey. And you cannot have a connection to the deep ground if you're not a paysan, a farmer. Thank you. So we need to wrap up this roundtable, and we'd like to thank all of the wine growers who have come here to bear testimony. And you have really met our expectations. You didn't give us a didactic course. You talked about your experience. You talked about your engagement, your commitment. And so thank you so much. And it was absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, we did not have time for questions. And we have a very tight schedule. We need to move on. And we need to go down to, you will be on the front row, all of you, to listen to the speeches, the inaugural speeches, which we will try to keep brief. So thank you so much.